Welcome to Kids Beyond the Pitch, the Kids for the World podcast exploring the impact of football kits on sustainability, social change, and the broader sports industry's environmental risk.
All right, let's take a look at this research you sent my way about sustainable football kits. Looks like we're really going to dive deep into the environmental side of the gear in this well-loved sport. Pretty cool. I see you've got excerpts from Sustainable Football Kits for the World, as well as like some EU regulations and even some stuff about fan perceptions.
Yeah, it should be a fascinating deep dive.
But what really jumps out at you right away?
You know, one thing that people don't always think about is how many football kits are made and then thrown away every year.
That's true. I mean, you just think about wearing your team's colors,
Yeah,
not the whole picture.
exactly.
So how many were we really talking about? Like, give me some numbers.
Well, Sustainable Football Kits for the World points out that club merchandise, especially kits, makes up a big part of a club's carbon footprint.
Makes sense.
You know, it's not just the game itself, it's all the other stuff connected to it that has an impact too.
Okay, yeah. But it can't just be the making of the kits, right? What about after the fans buy them?
You're right. Washing and wearing them, and, they're mainly polyester, that all takes a toll on the environment.
Huh.
The research says that just making one polyester shirt releases about 5.5 kilograms of CO2.
5.5 kilograms for one shirt. Whoa, that's way more than I would have thought. So we've got the production, we've got the fans wearing them. What happens to all those kits when no one's wearing them anymore?
That's a big problem. UEFA says that something like 60% of team kits are tossed out each year. We could be talking about 3 to 4 million sports kits getting destroyed every year.
Whoa, that's insane and definitely not sustainable. So where do we even start to fix something that big? What solutions are people looking at?
Well, one of the main ones they talk about is using a circular economy model.
For folks who might not be familiar with that term, could you break it down? Like, what does a circular economy look like, and how would it work for football kits?
Sure. It's basically a system where products and materials are used for as long as possible, instead of the usual way of take, make, and trash. So a jersey wouldn't just end up in a landfill after 1 or 2 seasons. You would try to make it last longer.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we actually make these kits last longer? What are some specific things clubs or even fans could do?
The first thing is to encourage reuse. Like, clubs could have programs to collect old kits and give them to communities that need them. There are already groups doing this, like Kits for the World.
That's a great idea, giving those jerseys a second life rather than chucking them. It helps the environment, it helps people. What about the kits that are like too worn out to be reused? How do those fit into this circular model?
That's where recycling comes in. But it's important to remember that recycling should be the last option. Even recycling uses energy and resources.
Oh.
Ideally, you want to keep using those materials as long as you can before you have to recycle them.
Makes sense. But even if we do recycle them, how do we know those recycled materials are being used to make new stuff? Couldn't they still end up in a landfill anyway?
That's where those digital product passports, the DPPs, come in. They're basically a way to track a product through its whole life, from when it's made to when it's thrown away.
Oh, like a passport for a product, but digital. Pretty smart. Could you give me an example of how that would work with a football kit?
Imagine you could scan a code on your kit and boom, you see where the materials came from, how it was made, how much energy was used, and even instructions on how to recycle it properly when it's time.
That's pretty amazing. So it would give people a lot more information so they can make better choices about what they buy. But what about the big players, like the clubs and manufacturers? What does the research say they can do to make things more sustainable?
Sustainable Football Kits for the World says that everyone needs to work together, like sports organizations, suppliers, manufacturers, even governing bodies. Some ideas they have are being more transparent with data, having loan programs for kits that aren't used much, and making clothes that can be used in different ways.
Sounds like it's going to take a real team effort, a whole new mindset for the whole industry. Speaking of changing the industry, I remember seeing something about new EU regulations that are supposed to make the fashion industry more sustainable. Can you tell me more about those?
Yeah, the EU is really taking the lead on this. They're putting in place regulations like a ban on destroying unsold products, something called the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or ESPR, and of course the introduction of those DPPs we talked about.
Those are pretty big changes.
Yeah.
How much of an impact do you think they'll actually have?
I think they're going to be a game changer, honestly. Encouraging companies to be more sustainable and giving consumers a lot more information is a big step in the right direction.
I'm curious about the ban on destroying unsold products. Like, how will they even enforce that?
Yeah.
What will it look like in the real world?
Companies will have to report every year how much stuff they destroy and why they did it. That kind of transparency should discourage them from destroying perfectly good products just because they're not the latest trend anymore.
Okay, that makes sense. So less waste and hopefully more repurposing and recycling. What about that ESPR thing? What's that all about?
The ESPR is about making sure that products are designed with sustainability in mind right from the start.
Right.
It's about things like durability, reusability, the ability to be upgraded, and recyclability. Products will have to last longer, use less energy, and be easier to take apart and reuse.
So it's not just about making something sustainable after the fact. It's about making it sustainable from the very beginning.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive.
It really is. The ESPR will force manufacturers to completely rethink how they design things and prioritize sustainability from day one.
This is all sounding really promising. But are there any challenges or roadblocks you see with making all these changes? It seems like a huge undertaking.
Of course. Just like with any system, there are going to be challenges. One thing they highlight in the research is this issue of microfibers.
Microfibers. I think I've heard of those, but can you remind me what they are?
They're those tiny threads that come off of synthetic fabrics like polyester whenever you wash them. You know those little bits that get stuck in your washing machine filter? Those are microfibers.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they were a problem for the environment.
Yeah, they are. They end up polluting waterways and harming marine life. They're so small that they go right through water filters and end up in the ocean. Fish and other animals eat them, and it can even mess up the whole food chain.
That's kind of scary. So even if we're really good about recycling old kits, are you saying these microfibers are still a problem we have to worry about?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a complicated issue that's going to take more research and innovation to solve. There are some new solutions coming out, like special filters for washing machines that can catch microfibers, but we need to see those being used everywhere.
It sounds like there's still a lot of work to do, but at least people are starting to pay attention, which is good. Speaking of paying attention, sustainable football kits, Kits for the World, talks about some interesting stuff about how fans feel about sustainability in football. They did a survey, right?
They did. A survey by Carbon Responsible found a really interesting difference between how different generations feel about sustainability in football.
Okay, that's interesting. Tell me more about what they found.
Younger fans are a lot more likely to hold clubs accountable for how they impact the environment.
So it's the younger generation that's really pushing for sustainability in football.
Absolutely. They're more aware of environmental issues and more likely to do something about it if they think their clubs aren't doing enough.
Like what kind of things? What would that look like?
It could be anything from going to fewer matches to spending less money on football stuff, or even joining online campaigns to pressure clubs to be more environmentally friendly.
Wow, that's a strong statement. It's one thing to say you care about the environment, but these fans are willing to put their money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And clubs are starting to realize that sustainability isn't just the right thing to do, it's good for business too.
Makes sense. Fans are any club's most valuable asset. If they're demanding sustainability, the clubs better listen.
You got it. And it's not just about keeping the fans happy, it's about creating a better future for the sport as a whole.
Well said. This has been really informative so far. But before we move on, I'm curious about the business side of all of this. What does Sustainable Football Kits for the World say about that?
They talk about something called the triple bottom line, or TBL approach.
TBL. Could you refresh my memory on what that means?
Sure. The TBL framework basically looks at the social, environmental, and economic impacts of a business or organization. It's about finding a balance between all three of those things to create a truly sustainable model.
Yeah, okay. And how would that apply to Sustainable Football Kits?
Well, on the social side, it's about making sure workers are treated fairly and getting fans actively involved in sustainability initiatives. On the environmental side, it's about minimizing the footprint through things like sustainable materials, reducing waste, and lowering emissions. And on the economic side, it's about making sure that profits are balanced with ethical and sustainable production.
So it's not just about being eco-friendly. It's about creating a system that's good for people, good for the planet, and still makes sense financially.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sustainability is not a zero-sum game. You can find solutions that benefit everyone.
I love that perspective. It's about finding those win-win-win scenarios. And it seems like Sustainable Football Kits for the World is a great example of an organization that's doing just that. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Absolutely. Their work on reusing kits is a fantastic example of how to keep products in use and reduce waste. And they're addressing the social side by donating those kits to people who need them. It proves that you can be socially and environmentally responsible at the same time.
It's inspiring to see organizations like that leading the charge. It definitely makes me hopeful for the future of football and the fashion industry as a whole. But I know we've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to explore in this world of sustainable football apparel. Ready to keep going?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the next layer of this research. Yeah, it's really great to see organizations like Kits for the World putting that triple bottom line into action. They're thinking about the social, environmental, and economic sides of things all at once.
Yeah, they're setting a good example for other companies to follow. And speaking of the industry as a whole, what about the business side of all this? I know the research mentioned that the football apparel market is supposed to grow a lot in the next few years.
Right.
What are the implications of that growth?
Yeah. Sustainable Football Kits for the World projects a pretty significant annual growth rate, something like 5.58% from 2023 to 2028.
Wow.
But you bring up a good point that kind of increased demand definitely raises some environmental concerns.
It feels like one of those, the more we grow, the bigger our footprint kind of situations. What are some ways to deal with that? Is the industry doing anything to address those environmental costs?
Thankfully, there's a growing awareness of these issues, both from within the industry and from consumers. The research points to a trend of more sustainable practices starting to gain traction in the football apparel market.
That's good to hear. What are some of those practices?
Well, there's a definite move towards using more natural materials, things like organic cotton and bamboo.
Okay.
Those are more biodegradable and require less water and pesticides to grow, so that's a big plus for the environment.
That's fantastic. What about the manufacturing process itself? Are there any new approaches being used there to make things more sustainable?
Definitely. There's a big focus now on reducing waste and emissions during manufacturing. Companies are trying out more efficient dyeing techniques, using recycled materials, and even looking into using 3D printing to make custom-fit clothing on demand.
Wait, 3D printing for football kits? That's amazing. Tell me more about that.
It is. And it has the potential to really change the industry. Imagine being able to create kits that fit perfectly without any leftover fabric scraps. That's the power of 3D printing.
I love that. But even with these advancements, I know there are still some challenges. Earlier, we were talking about microfiber pollution.
Right.
Can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. Microfibers are those tiny plastic particles that come off of synthetic fabrics when you wash them. They're so small that they slip through water filtration systems and end up in the oceans. And because they're plastic, they don't break down, so they're a real danger to marine life.
It's kind of scary to think about something so small having such a big impact. So even if people are good about recycling their kits, are those microfibers still something we need to be concerned about?
Unfortunately, yes. It's a tricky problem, but there are things we can do to minimize the damage.
Okay, good. I was hoping you'd say that. So what can be done?
Well, for starters, people can use washing machines that have special filters to catch microfibers. These filters trap the microfibers before they can get into the water system.
Are those filters easy to find? Or do you have to get them specially?
They're becoming more common, but they're not standard in all washing machines yet. You can also find filters that you can add to your existing machine.
Got it. So that's something that individuals can do. But what about the industry? Are there any solutions being explored at the production level to address this microfiber issue?
Yeah, researchers are working on developing new synthetic fabrics that shed fewer microfibers. That would be a huge help. They're also experimenting with different fabric treatments that can help reduce shedding.
It seems like we need to attack this problem from all sides. Both consumers and the industry need to work together to find solutions.
You're absolutely right. It's a shared responsibility. We all need to do our part to reduce microfiber pollution.
Well said. The research also mentioned something called single event design. Can you explain what that is and why it's a problem in terms of sustainability?
Sure. Single event design is pretty common in the sports apparel industry. It's when they create clothing specifically for a single event, like the Olympics or the World Cup.
Oh, okay.
It's often driven by marketing and branding, but it creates a ton of waste.
So you're saying they make kits that are only worn a few times and then basically thrown away? That doesn't sound very sustainable at all. Are there any alternatives to that?
Instead of designing a whole new kit for each event, clubs could maybe just update the design of existing kits or add a few new elements to freshen things up. That would drastically reduce the amount of waste.
That's a smart idea. But I imagine there might be some pushback from the marketing side.
Yeah,
New kits generate a lot of buzz and revenue.
that's true. But there's a growing understanding that sustainability isn't just about doing the right thing, it's also good business. Consumers are looking for sustainable products. If brands don't get on board, they risk losing customers.
Adapt or die, right?
Pretty much. The brands that embrace sustainability are the ones that will succeed in the long run.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know Sustainable Football Kits for the World also mentioned something called the Measuring Fashion Report. Can you tell me about that? What are some of the key takeaways from that report?
Yeah, the Measuring Fashion Report is a big study that looked at the environmental impact of the entire fashion industry, and that includes sportswear.
Okay.
One of the key findings is that the fashion industry is a major contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. It also highlighted the enormous amount of water and energy used in clothing production.
That's not really surprising, considering how many clothes are made and bought around the world.
Yeah.
But what solutions does the report suggest? It can't all be bad news, right?
No, not at all. The report outlines 3 main scenarios for reducing the industry's impact by 2030.
3 scenarios. Tell me more about those.
The first scenario focuses on switching to renewable energy sources for clothing production. That would significantly reduce the industry's carbon footprint. The second scenario emphasizes promoting energy efficiency and finding ways to make the whole supply chain more productive. So basically, optimizing manufacturing processes, making transportation routes shorter, and minimizing waste.
So it's about making the whole process more efficient and eliminating as much waste as possible. What about the third scenario?
The third scenario focuses on using circular economy principles, things like using more recycled fibers and designing clothes that are more durable and recyclable.
It sounds like they're covering all the bases with those 3 scenarios, a really holistic approach.
Exactly. The report stresses that a combination of all 3 of these scenarios will be necessary to achieve significant impact reduction by 2030.
It's a big challenge, but it's one we have to tackle. What else did the report say? Anything else that stood out?
They also highlighted the difficulty in measuring the environmental impact of clothing production because the data can be so different. There's a lack of standard ways to collect data and industry-wide benchmarks. That makes it tough to get an accurate picture of the environmental impact of different products and to compare how well different companies are doing.
So it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Exactly. This lack of standardized data creates uncertainty and makes it hard to track progress towards sustainability goals.
So what can be done to fix this data problem? Sounds like a big obstacle if everyone is measuring things differently.
The report suggests creating more robust data collection systems and setting clear industry standards for measuring environmental impact. They also emphasize the need for companies to be more transparent and share their data.
So it's about creating a level playing field where everyone is using the same metrics and being open about their data. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. It would allow us to actually see the true environmental impact of the industry and to track our progress over time.
This deep dive has been really informative. We've covered a lot of ground, from the economic forces that are driving market growth to the environmental challenges posed by things like microfibers and single event design. We even talk about the importance of data transparency and standardized metrics.
It's been a really fascinating exploration so far, and we're not done yet. In part 3 of our deep dive, we'll be looking at EU legislation and how it's going to shape a more sustainable future for the industry.
I can't wait to get into that. It sounds like a real game changer. All right, so we've talked about the challenges, the opportunities, like all the different angles of making football apparel more sustainable. But what about regulations? Can they really drive meaningful change?
Oh, definitely. Regulations are a huge piece of the puzzle. And the EU is really stepping up, pushing for change across a lot of industries, including fashion and, sports apparel. Sustainable football kits for the world highlight some EU regulations that are going to have a major impact, I think.
Okay, lay it on me. What are these game-changing regulations all about?
One of the biggest is this upcoming ban on destroying unsold textiles, clothing, and footwear. It's a massive step toward tackling that huge waste problem in the fashion industry.
Whoa, a full-on ban. That's a bold move. How's that even going to work? What are companies supposed to do with all that unsold stuff?
Well, the idea is to push them away from just tossing stuff out. Instead of destroying it, they'll have to look at other options like donating to charities, repurposing the materials, or finding ways to recycle it.
So it's about forcing them to be more creative, finding ways to be more circular in their approach.
Exactly. It's a big incentive for companies to adopt more sustainable practices and move away from that take, make, dispose model.
It's awesome to see that happening at a policy level.
Yeah.
But I know the ban is just one part of the EU's plan, right? What else are they doing?
Another big one is the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, or ESPR. We touched on it earlier, but it's worth repeating how important it is. This sets sustainability requirements for a bunch of products, including textiles.
Yeah, right. Designing products with durability, reusability, all that good stuff in mind from the get-go. It's a way more comprehensive approach.
Totally. It's a shift away from those throwaway products and towards stuff designed to last longer and be part of a circular system. The ESPR will force manufacturers to really change how they do things, making sustainability a priority at every step.
It's great to see the EU leading the way toward a more sustainable fashion industry. Anything else on the horizon?
Well, on top of the ban and the ESTR, they're also rolling out those digital product passports, the DPPs we were talking about.
Yeah.
They'll give people way more information about the environmental impact of what they're buying.
Oh, yeah, those digital passports that let you see a product's whole journey. It's a cool way to give consumers more power to make better choices.
Exactly. DPPs are going to change the game in terms of transparency and making companies accountable. They should push companies to be more sustainable and give people the information they need to buy stuff that aligns with their values.
It's pretty amazing how tech can be a force for sustainability.
Right.
But it's not just about consumer choices, is it? These EU regulations put more responsibility on the companies making these products too, right?
Absolutely. The idea of extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is a big part of these regulations.
Sure.
Basically, it means companies are responsible for the environmental impact of their products even after they're sold.
So they're accountable for a product's entire life, not just until it leaves the store.
Right. It encourages them to design things that can be recycled and to think about what happens to their products at the end of their life. EPR programs might involve things like making companies pay for the collection and recycling of their products.
It's a big shift, putting the responsibility on the producer instead of just expecting consumers or governments to deal with the waste.
Yeah, it's huge. EPR is a key part of building a circular economy and a truly sustainable system.
We've covered the environmental and economic sides pretty well, but what about the social aspects? Do these EU laws address things like fair labor practices in the fashion industry?
Oh yeah, for sure. The EU is all about ethical and sustainable supply chains, and that includes workers' rights. They're putting in place a new directive called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or CSDDD, to address these issues.
CSDDD. All right, break that down for me. What's that all about?
It will basically require big companies to identify and prevent any negative impacts their operations have on human rights and the environment throughout their supply chains, and then do something about it.
Okay.
So things like making sure workers get paid fairly, have safe working conditions, and the right to form unions.
It sounds like they're going for a comprehensive approach, holding companies accountable for their whole supply chain, not just what happens in their own factories.
Exactly. The CSDDD is all about making sure companies are held to the same high standards, no matter where they operate.
It's pretty inspiring to see the EU taking such a broad approach to sustainability. Environmental, social, economic, they're hitting all the angles. It's a good example for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I agree. The EU's leadership is great to see, and hopefully it will inspire other countries to follow suit. The fashion industry, including football apparel, still has a lot of work to do when it comes to sustainability, but these EU regulations are a big step in the right direction.
Wow, what an incredibly insightful deep dive this has been. We've explored all the different sides of making football apparel more sustainable, from the hidden costs of production to the exciting new solutions, the thoughts of the fans, the role of tech, and the impact of these upcoming regulations.
It's been a fascinating journey for sure. We've uncovered some tough truths about the impact of this industry, but also a wave of positive change driven by consumer awareness, new technologies, and these progressive regulations. The future of football apparel is still taking shape, but one thing's for certain. Sustainability is no longer an option. It's a core value that's shaping the industry now and will define its future.
It really makes you think. The next time you see someone sporting their favorite team's jersey, there's a whole story there.
You said it. And as consumers, we have more power than we think. By being informed and supporting brands that are committed to sustainability, we can all be a part of positive change in the industry.
Well, it's been a pleasure diving into this with you. Until next time.